Chapter 246 Regained Past Memories. However, the sound of a gunshot made her jump, and she hurried to follow the sound. There she found her father standing outside the house, holding a gun to a man's head, a man she recognized as Xavier's father. The gun went off in Mia's head at the same time the gun in the warehouse resounded in her brain, and an agonizing scream tore out of her throat at the thought that Neil had been shot just like his father had been. Mia fell to the ground, grabbing her head and shaking as she believed Neil had been shot. She refused to look up and see him lying lifeless on the ground. She refused to see him lying in a pool of blood like his father had been when she watched him get killed by that monster. Her grief and agony poured out as she cried, her entire body shaking with the intensity of her emotions. Her entire memories flooded back, and she remembered everything, her childhood, her pain, and how Neil had been the one to keep her going. They'd indeed known each other before, and she'd loved him even before knowing what it was. But now she'd lost him. He was gone before she could tell him the truth her little self had been dying to tell him before she'd been pulled to those doctors to make her forget. Owen had killed him before she could fulfill her promise of avenging his father's death. Her little self had watched his father and mother get killed mercilessly, and she'd been terrified and furious to the point she'd wanted to kill her own father, but had ended up getting slapped. When he'd slapped her and pointed a gun at her, she'd panicked and ran to save her life. She'd run to her room, but he'd followed her. Those nightmares that had always haunted her teenage years and adulthood had been of that night. The fear of guns had started from that night. The horrors she'd lived through that night had been her worst nightmare. She'd not only lost her memories but her mother. She remembered everything now. Her mother had died saving her and her twin who didn't want to be saved from an abusive father. Her twin had been the main reason their mother was no more. Mia remembered everything, every single detail like it had happened last night. She remembered the last time she saw Xavier that night. He had looked so broken and lost that she'd wanted to go with him wherever he was going, but she was being held down by Nanny Eliza and the doctor who was about to perform some surgery on her as her mother was speaking to Xavier at the door. Neil, he was no more now. Her husband was no more. Mia's shoulders shook from her sobs all the while her eyes remained tightly shut. "Ah, UFC King BTCH, how dare you shoot me?" exclaimed Owen in rage, snapping Mia out of her momentary agony and grief for her husband. She slowly looked up and was taken aback to see Neil still sitting on his knees, bleeding not from a gunshot but from the beating. His unfocused, worried gray eyes were on her. She then looked to the side and saw Owen clutching his bleeding right arm. Frowning, Mia turned to the direction Owen was looking and saw a woman standing there with a gun and countless men behind her. A woman with the same face as hers. Mia gasped in disbelief when her eyes met with the woman's. It was like looking into a mirror, they were identical. She would have panicked by now if she hadn't suddenly recalled her past memories and realized she had a sister, but she was surprised to see her. However, the look in her twin's eyes was of disdain and hate. She didn't look surprised to see Mia, as if she knew she'd be here. Mia watched as her twin turned to Owen with a murderous look and demanded, "Did you think I wouldn't know of your plans? How dare you go against me behind my back?" Mariana was so angry she wanted nothing but to kill Owen for what he'd done to Xavier, but she held back. It was a good thing she had kept a spy among his men, or she wouldn't have known of his plans. She hated people who went back on their word. She'd been away arranging things for the life she would have far away with Xavier and the child Mia would give birth to, only to be told that Owen was going to kill the man she had done all of this for. The love of her life. She could never imagine a life without him after she had allowed herself this once to dream of a future that had never seemed important to her in the past, but now was incredibly important as she would spend it with Xavier and probably their child if this psycho Owen hadn't already hurt the baby from the cut on Mia's side. Owen quickly defended himself as he noticed the murderous look in her eyes and the countless men behind her. "I was only teaching Neil a lesson and nothing more. Take a chill pill. I wasn't going to kill him." He grimaced in pain as his arm suddenly burned from the bullet wound, and said, "What was the need of shooting me? Look how I'm losing so much blood." Mariana ignored him and instead turned to look at Neil, who was staring only at Mia even though his head was bleeding. As if he could no longer hold on, he slowly began to fall until he hit the ground and fell unconscious. Mia immediately stood up, intending to run to him, but Mariana signaled her men to hold her back. When they held her, she began to struggle, yelling for them to let her go. Owen demanded when he saw the men holding Mia, "What are you doing, Mariana? He would not allow someone else to hurt her in his presence. She was only his to do whatever he pleased and not this little b****. Mariana glared at him and said coolly, "I'm in charge now. You will do only as I say, or you can kiss goodbye to her and your life." Saying that, she walked up to the unconscious Neil and pulled his head onto her lap. With a shaky hand, she traced her fingers against his blood-covered face. She'd always dreamed of being this close to him, but not in this condition. Her heart grew warm as she traced her finger against his lips, neck, and solid chest. He was perfect even in such a condition, and he was going to be hers very soon. Once he regained consciousness, she'd make sure to explain to him and make him understand that she was the right Mimi. A faint smile graced her face, but it fell immediately as she saw the bruises covering his body. How dare Owen do this to him? Oh, she'd make him regret it so much. She signaled her men to help her lift Neil to the room upstairs, which Owen had arranged for Mia before, but now she intended to nurse Neil back to health in the room. As they began to lift him and walk away, Mia yelled at Mariana, "Where are you taking my husband?" Mariana stopped in her tracks, turned around, and looked at the face that looked like hers but she hated so badly. She walked up to Mia and looked down at her belly, then said, "If you know what's good for you, shut up and forget you have a husband. Xavier will no longer be yours because he is rightfully mine and I'm taking him back now." Mia looked at her sister in disbelief. She felt her own anger boil over. She didn't know how she'd come to remember a memory that had been buried deep within her, but she remembered and knew the things her sister had done to her in the past. How her sister and her so-called father had turned her into a psychopath who believed the world was out to get her, and if she didn't defend herself, she'd be in pain. She then said, "Neil was never yours. He never knew you existed because all the while, he thought you were me, Mari." Mia was 100% sure Neil had met her first. She was the one who had met him when he was grieving for his dead dog in the garden of their house after she had sneaked in to see the beautiful garden through the hole she had made below the Galvera estate fence. She had tried to console him, but he had pushed her away and then felt guilty when he saw her sad face. She remembered it clearly now. He had given her a chocolate to make her happy, and then she had promised him a new dog. "He met me first, Mari." "You!" Mariana raised her hand, the same hand Mia had used a nail on, and slapped her hard on the face before saying, "Never." She emphasized her words by pointing her index finger at Mia. "In your life call me that name. I allowed a lot of things in our childhood, but not anymore. I will tell Neil everything you did and that I am his Mimi. I am only allowing you to live because of the child in your womb, and once the child is born, I will have no use for you again." Mia's head whipped to the side from the force of the slap. She tasted blood in her mouth, and tears stung her eyes. But she refused to cry. She'd cried enough for a lifetime. She looked back at her sister, defiance and rage burning in her gaze. "You will never have him. He loves me, and no matter what lies you tell him, he will always come back to me," Mia said with so much confidence and belief in her husband and in his love for her. She wasn't afraid, because she knew her Neil would never believe Mariana. Mariana smirked, taking Mia's words as a challenge. "We shall see about that. For now, you'd better behave if you want to keep yourself safe. I'm in charge now." With that, Mariana turned and walked away, leaving Mia struggling in the grip of the men holding her. Her heart ached for Neil as they carried him away, still bleeding, but she knew she had to be strong. She couldn't let her sister and Owen win. Not now, not ever. Chapter 247, Meeting the Real Mimi. When he woke up, he felt a throbbing headache that made it a challenge to open his eyes at first. The headache was so intense it made his mind blank. He tried to turn around but felt something damp on his forehead slide to the side and slender fingers caressing his face as they pushed the damp cloth back to his forehead. Neil stiffened at the touch on his bare chest. He didn't have to open his eyes to know that he was lying on a bed with someone hovering over him, taking care of him. How did he even get here? And where the hell was he? Neil wondered silently as the hand kept moving around his torso, trying to coax him awake or massage him. He tried to remember what had happened and why he was on the bed, and slowly, memories started to flood his mind. He had come to rescue his wife and had planned with Liam to come after him, but then he was tricked by that bastard Owen, and then Mia. Mia! If he was here on a bed being attended to by someone, where the hell was his wife? With those thoughts, Neil forced his eyes open immediately and attempted to get up from the bed, but the person hovering around him grabbed his arm and tried to push him back down. Neil grabbed the person's hand and snapped his head towards them with the intention to demand his wife's whereabouts. However, he momentarily froze when he saw the face. A soul-crushing relief washed over him, leaving him feeling numb. She was safe and right here beside him. His Mia was here. Without hesitation, he added pressure to her hand and pulled her into his arms, wrapping her in his strong embrace as he buried his head into the crook of her neck and breathed in her scent, only to realize it was different today. But he didn't dwell on it, as he was too relieved to know that she was here and that they had somehow made it out alive. Thank goodness, you're all right. Oh, my love, for a moment I thought I'd lost you. You will never lose me, darling. And I will never leave you again, she whispered and raised her arm, hugging him back with as much strength as he was hugging her. Neil felt warmth surge into his heart, but the warmth was short-lived as he realized something strange that made him frown. To confirm it, he slid one of his hands down and touched her belly. He momentarily stiffened before he jerked back from the hug and looked down panickingly at her flat belly. What happened? Did that bastard do something to our children? He questioned, but without giving her the chance to reply, he reached out and pulled up her shirt to reveal her stomach. He was shocked and surprised to find out that there were no signs of cuts or operations on her flat stomach. Slowly, he let go of her shirt and moved back to study her face for a moment. Then, as if he'd found what he was looking for, he jerked out of the bed so quickly he almost lost his balance from the sudden dizziness that washed over him. You are not her. You are not my wife. Who the hell are you, and where is my wife? He demanded in a thunderous voice that shook the room's walls and made Mariana stand up to her feet to face him. Don't you dare come any closer to me, he snapped when she started to approach him. The relief he'd felt a moment ago from the thought that Mia was safe had turned to rage. He was so furious he might end up hurting this stranger if she dared come close to him. He saw the hurt in her eyes that looked just like his wife's, but he didn't care because she wasn't her. I will not repeat myself again after this. Where the FCK is my wife? He snapped impatiently, angry veins bulging on his forehead and neck. She's still at the warehouse, Mariana said calmly, not because she was afraid he might hurt her from how angry he looked, but because she believed he'd only calm down and listen to what she had to say after hearing about Mia's whereabouts. You've been unconscious for 2 days, Xavier. You should rest and have something to eat, she said as she began to approach him, but he stepped back, away from her touch. Unconscious for 2 days? Which meant Mia was down there for 2 FC King days while he was here in a small, fancy room. How could you do this to her? He muttered softly but angrily. Mariana frowned at Neil's question and replied, I didn't do anything that Mia didn't deserve. Whatever is happening now is because she deserves it. She deserves it? He repeated like he couldn't believe her. What exactly does she deserve? His voice was laced with disgust and rage. And you think you deserve any better? Mariana yelled, Yes. I deserve better than a sister who stole my place. She told Neil, Did you know that Mia pretended to be Mimi just so you could love her? I am the real Mimi, not Mia. I am the one you loved in our childhood. Neil's expression blanked out for a moment, processing her words. Believing she was making him see the truth, Mariana continued, I've waited for this day for so long. I have never forgotten your promises of marrying me when we grow older. You remember, don't you? The time you sat me up on that white swing in your garden and told me that because we are still young, that you'd wait for me until I grew older to marry me. You said you'd protect me until the end of time, Xavier. I have held on to those promises until now. I love you. Without waiting for him to react, she ran towards him and wrapped her arms around his waist, muttering how much she loves him against his skin. Neil raised his hands, grabbed her arms, and slowly but firmly pushed her away from him. He then looked down at her with pure disgust and disbelief. When I first realized my wife had a twin, I thought the twin would be different from their father and be as sweet as my wife. I even thought of approaching you and giving Mia a surprise after giving birth. But I am more than disappointed to know that you are just like your father, a selfish and delusional heartless bastard. Mariana was taken aback by his words. She asked, shocked, You knew we were twins? Neil replied, Since the day I knew the truth about Kelvin Rodrigo being Mia's father, I've known about you. He had learned about her after Liam brought him pictures of Kelvin's daughter. Because she was wearing a mask, he hadn't seen her face until he dug deeper into her background and realized she looked exactly like his wife in a high school picture. The only difference was the air around them. She looked arrogant and aloof in every school picture, while his wife was like a sweet angel with a presence that could melt a stone. Even now, despite their resemblance, he could never mistake her for his Mia. Her eyes looked so much like his wife's but held so much difference that it made him even angrier to know that Mia was still down in that pit. "I am so disappointed in you, Miss Rodrigo," he said, and without waiting for her to reply, he turned around, about to leave and go find his wife, but Mariana quickly grabbed his arm and asked with a shaky smile, "What about our childhood history together?" With an emotionless voice and expression, Neil replied, "Whatever happened in the past is in the past. Mia is the one I love and want, not you. If you know what's best for you, let go of my arm and never show yourself to me again because I might end up killing you for what you've put Mia through. The only reason I am not doing anything to you is because you have a face I value the most in this world, the face of my wife." Mariana felt a sense of betrayal wash over her. Her heart felt like 1,000 pins were piercing through it. The pain was so intense she couldn't breathe. How dare he say the past meant nothing to him when she'd held on to it like a lifeline? How could he let go of the memories she'd held on to for 20 years like they were nothing? She'd loved him with all her heart and looked forward to this day. She'd lived through hell after she was taken to the States to train, but because of him, she'd stayed alive and strived hard to finish her mission of making the biggest weapons her father wanted to possess so she could return to him. She'd envisioned this moment of their reunion to be a romantic one where Neil would kiss her and say he'd never been happy with Mia because he'd always felt something off with her. But he didn't even seem to care about anything about her but Mia. How could he? Mariana's fists clenched so tightly she felt her long nails biting into her palm as she watched Neil turn around to leave the room. Without thinking, she rushed after him and raised her hand, striking the side of his neck in a precise manner that made him fall unconscious before he could even react. She used a technique she had been taught to render someone unconscious instantly. Neil's body crumpled to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. Tears welled up in her eyes as she began to drag him back toward the bed. She'd never cried for anything in 20 years, but now she was crying for her loss. She was so heartbroken and angry that she didn't care if he got injured as she roughly pulled him along the ground. He didn't want her, right? Then he'd never have Mia in this lifetime for as long as she lived, Mariana decided. With each tug, her resolve hardened. Neil had betrayed her, and he would pay for it. She would make sure of it. The tears flowed freely as she dragged his unconscious body, her heart shattering with every step. But amidst the heartbreak, a dark determination settled in her chest. Neil Wayner would regret ever choosing Mia over her. Chapter 248 Goodbye, Sister. She was seated on the dirty floor, leaning against the pillar behind her with her eyes closed. There was nothing she could do to change her situation with countless men surrounding her, and her side burned and throbbed with every reckless movement she made. Thank goodness the cut wasn't too deep and had stopped bleeding, but it was still hurting her. Mia hadn't eaten for days and had only been given water by one of the men, who seemed to pity her or was instructed by someone to give her water now and then. She had worried about Neil until she could no longer help it and blocked her mind off the things she couldn't control. The only reason she wasn't panicking was because she knew Mariana wouldn't kill or hurt Neil as she claimed to love him, and if her husband was conscious by now, he'd soon come looking for her. She wanted nothing more than to be in their house and their room, sleeping in each other's embrace. She missed those days when she woke up to his morning kisses, a good meal, and a soothing hot bath. Being in a smelly place for almost a week now made her feel dirty and disgusting. She numbed her mind to everything and decided to stay here until who knows when. In her condition, she could barely even move a limb without feeling pain, let alone plan an escape from hundreds of armed men. However, as she couldn't do anything but remain seated with her eyes closed, her mind went back to the past she had just recently remembered. The past that had remained a blur to her for 20 years was now as fresh as new. Everything about it was strange, but she was glad to remember. She could still see her real mother's beautiful smiling face in her mind's eye as if she were still in front of her. She could still remember all the things she had gone through just to keep her daughter safe from a monster who was hell-bent on destroying her. If it weren't for her biological mother and her mother Elizabeth, she would have been dead by now. Those two had been the reason she was still alive, but it broke her heart to know that they had died a terrible death and that she would never see either of them again. A single tear for both her mothers rolled down her cheeks. The sound of the gun going off in her head when her real mother had been shot trying to escape with Nanny Eliza, who was holding the little her, was so fresh in her mind she felt a huge lump in her throat and her heart tightening at the recollection of the person who'd pulled the trigger that night. The look her mother had given her before dying in Nanny Eliza's arms made Mia unable to hold her emotions. She remembered her exact words that day. "Eliza, please, take good care of her. Don't ever let her find out about me or the life she lived before. She's now yours, take care of her." She choked out with blood oozing out of her mouth and nose as she glanced at the younger Mia, who still had a bandage around her head, and said with a bitter smile, "I love you, Mia. What, you have a name now, my girl. Mia." Then she went quiet and still in the nanny's arms, her eyes wide open. Mia had watched her nanny cry and try to shake her mother awake, but Mia had not shed a single tear because she couldn't remember the woman as a mother but a total stranger who had tried to help them and ended up being killed by. "I hope that tear on your face is because you are praying to live to see tomorrow, Black Seed," came Mariana's voice, snapping Mia out of her grief and causing her eyes to fly open. She watched Mariana approach her with a huge bag in hand with two men following closely behind her holding something. What was that? She squinted her eyes and noticed that they were holding gallons of fuel. What do they plan to do with that? She wondered, but as if Mariana, who was walking towards her, read her mind, she chuckled humorlessly and said, "These are for you, my darling sister. I have a big surprise for you, a surprise I've been intending to give you since the day I watched Mother take you away, leaving me behind. You remember that night, don't you?" Mia felt rage consume her at the mention of the unfortunate night where her mother had been killed by none other than Mariana herself. Mia had never been someone who would cause anybody harm, but right at this moment she wished she could cause harm to her sister like she'd caused to their mother. She clenched her fists to hold back her impulse of standing up and whacking Mariana's head. "How could you, Mari?" Mia muttered through clenched teeth. "She was our mother, and she loved us both more than anything." Did I just hear you say she loved us both?" Mariana cut her off with dark laughter. "Ella never loved me, she loved you. She was always worried about you and your well-being while forgetting about the well-being of her own real daughter. Have you forgotten? Let me remind you if you have. The day you nailed my hand to the ground, Mother didn't even worry about me but you. She went rushing to you, kissing and hugging you while I was in so much pain calling for her. The day you whacked my head with a pan, Mother never came to see me. She slept in your room that night while I woke up in the middle of the night feeling lonely and wanting to be hugged by someone, by my mother. But she was never there. She was never there when Father gave me a gun to shoot an innocent cat in a tree. She was never there to protect me from him like she was there to protect you. We lived in the same house, yet she never knew Father gave me guns to protect myself. And now you tell me she loved me? Where is the love? I never felt it nor saw it in her eyes. She loved you, not me. Was that why you chose to shoot her with the gun Calvin gave you? Does that justify you murdering her, Mari?" Mia asked calmly, her heart tightening up and her throat burning with emotions. "If you remember clearly, Mother wanted to take you along that night but you refused to come. You pushed her away and threatened to tell Father if she dared to leave. Mom didn't want to leave you until she was pulled away by Nanny Eliza, crying and refusing to leave, and yet you tell me she didn't love you?" Mia could still remember that night. Their mother had refused to leave the house without taking her second daughter before Calvin returned. However, Mariana had made it difficult, refusing to go with them until their nanny told their mother that they had to leave before Calvin came back and that Mariana would be safe with her father but Mia wouldn't because once he returned, he'd kill her like he'd promised. Only then had their mother agreed to leave with the promise of coming back for Mari, who had watched them leave with her hands clenched at her sides with hate burning in her brown eyes. They had left the house through the back entrance that was built for emergency exit and walked into the night with Nanny Eliza carrying her and their mother following behind. They had made it far from the house when a voice called out from behind. "Mom!" Mariana had called, and their mother had stopped and immediately turned at the thought that her second daughter had decided to follow them. Mia had seen the smile and happiness in their mother's brown eyes as she turned to face her daughter, only to be shot in the chest before she could register anything that was happening. Her legs had given way beneath her immediately. Mia recalled locking eyes with Mariana that night before the girl had run away through the night before any of them could react. Mariana's voice cut through her thoughts like a knife. "It was your fault that she died, Mia. If you hadn't convinced her to run away with you, none of this would have happened." Mia's eyes widened in disbelief. "How can you say that? You were the one who pulled the trigger, Mari." You killed her. Mariana's face twisted with rage. I had no choice. She'd put me through so much pain because of you. And now, you will pay for that night. Because I will never forgive you for what happened. You stole away everything from me, and I hate you for it. Mia's heart ached with the weight of her sister's words. She had always known Mariana was troubled, but to hear her twist the truth so maliciously was almost too much to bear. You can't blame me for your actions, Mari. You have to take responsibility for what you did. You killed her. You made me do it. You've always been the favored one, the one everyone gives attention to. I was always in your shadow, always second best. Mariana yelled out like a maniac. Mia's eyes filled with tears as she realized the depth of her sister's jealousy and hatred. She couldn't believe Mariana would consider what she'd gone through in her childhood as being favored. I never wanted to take anything from you. I never wanted to be Mother's favorite. I just wanted to have a family and be loved, Mari. Mariana laughed bitterly. Well, now you have none. Just like me. She dropped the huge bag she was holding in front of Mia and said, just like Ella and Eliza, you will be gone tonight as well. Mia's eyes narrowed suspiciously at those words. Eliza? She asked, what did you do to her? Were you the one who killed her? Her eyes widened in realization. Mariana smirked at that. Took you long enough to realize. 20 years ago, Mariana had not intended to pull that trigger that night, but after she'd done it, she'd convinced herself that it was Mia who'd killed their mother. She'd not told their father about it throughout the years he was searching for Ella. She was afraid he'd kill her too if he were to know the truth. She'd kept it to herself and made sure he'd never see Eliza again. However, 5 years ago when she heard the news that he'd tracked Eliza's whereabouts through Mia, who he'd seen on the school's live event, and was going to confront her to ask her about their mother, Mariana had acted quickly and sent men to threaten the woman to keep her mouth shut. She'd threatened her with Mia's life if she were to tell Kelvin anything about that night. Mariana had no idea what Eliza told her father, but when he called her one night in his drunken state crying that Neil Wayner was the one who killed Ella, Mariana had been mad that Eliza had put the blame on her Neil. Thus, Mariana sent men to end her life. Mia's emotions turned to rage, and she stood up without thinking and grabbed Mariana, but before she could do anything, 2 men pulled her away from her. Mia struggled and yelled for them to let her go, but Mariana ignored her and signaled her men to tie her down against the pillar with a chain. Mia demanded what they were doing, but they ignored her and did what they were asked. She then watched as Mariana began to open the bag she had brought in with her. Mia's breath caught short in her lungs as she saw her twin pull out something that looked like a bomb. The device was crude but effective looking, with wires and a timer attached to a bundle of explosives. It was the kind of bomb that could easily reduce the entire warehouse to rubble. Mariana held it up for Mia to see, her eyes gleaming with pride and satisfaction as the bomb was one of the rare masterpieces she'd been working on for years and had intended to use it today instead of selling it like she'd planned to do before. This, dear sister, is your final surprise. A fitting end for the one who stole everything from me. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the ominous bomb. Mari, you don't have to do this. Mariana's face hardened. Oh, but I do. You took everything from me, and now I will take everything from you, including your unborn children's life. Oh, I heard you are having twins as well. Too bad they won't get to see the lights of the world before they'll burn in flames along with you. As Mariana set the bomb down and began to arm it, Mia struggled against her restraints, desperation clawing at her insides at the realization that she would die along with her children. She couldn't let this happen. She had to find a way to stop her sister and save herself. Mariana, please? Mia's voice was a raw whisper, her desperation to live palpable. Think about what you're doing. You don't have to go down this path. We can find another way. We can be a family again, start afresh. Just the 2 of us. Do you remember the promise you made me when we were 4? I love you. I will always protect you. Little Mariana had said to her twin as they played. Mariana's eyes flickered with something, maybe doubt, maybe regret, but then they hardened again. There is no other way, Mia. This is the only way. With the timer set, Mariana stood back, a cruel smile on her lips as she watched Mia struggle to free from the chains that were attached to the gallons of fuels. Goodbye, sister. Mia watched in horror as the seconds ticked away. She knew she had to do something, anything, to convince Mariana to stop the bomb and change her mind. But as she looked into her sister's eyes, she realized that Mariana had made up her mind. There would be no turning back. Chapter 249 The Bomb. When his eyes opened again, his entire body was sore and in pain. He was bruised all over, but this time there was no Mia's twin hovering over him and touching him. Realizing that he hadn't gone to look for his wife before she'd hit him on the neck, Neil jumped out of the bed in a hurry that made his head dizzy, but he shook it off, angry that she'd caught him off guard when she struck his neck. From how he hadn't felt her move behind him before she struck him, it was obvious she'd been trained and a master in that. He was still in that same room from earlier, and if he'd gotten it right, he'd heard Mia's twin say that Mia was down in the warehouse, which meant the warehouse was still somewhere around here. He touched his throbbing head and realized he had a bandage around it and another one around his midriff. Without even bothering to look for his shirt, he hurried towards the door, only to find it locked from the outside. However, a single lock could never stop him from reaching his wife. He ran back, then ran forward at full speed, using his shoulder to break the door open. The door broke out of its frame and crashed to the corridor. Neil expected men to rush at him, but strangely, nobody came. The corridor was so empty and quiet he could hear his rough breathing. He hadn't recovered to his full strength as his limbs were still shaking, but that as well would never stop him. If only he could get a phone to call Liam or James so they could track his call and lead his soldiers here, but Owen was smart enough to take away his gun and phone after knocking him out. He didn't even know where he was or if he was still in Silverbrook or in another city. Stepping out into the quiet corridor, Neil began to hurry down the path that seemed to lead to an exit. It was night already, and the corridor's light flickered every now and then, causing the path to look ominous, but he didn't care. His only goal was to find that damned warehouse and get his wife out of here. For some reason, his heightened sense and instinct told him there was no one in the building but him. He couldn't sense any presence. Even as he stepped out of the building and was met with the rundown warehouse across the street, he didn't see anybody. He looked around his surroundings. Thank goodness there was a full moon that illuminated the darkened night and allowed him to see that he was in the middle of nowhere. Tall trees were all around him, and the wind blew in full force, carrying with it a scent of earth like it was about to rain. There was no car or any vehicle in sight. Cursing under his breath, Neil proceeded to go into the warehouse. He ran all the way there and found the door open. His heart slammed against his ribs as he heard the silence in the building as well. Had they taken Mia away to another place? He wondered as he looked around the huge warehouse with his heart in his stomach. If they'd taken her somewhere else, it would take him a long time to find her, and what if Owen had taken her to the doctors he said would remove her pregnancy? With those thoughts, Neil felt his blood run cold, and panic began to settle inside him, a panic that made him frantically begin to search the entire place while yelling her name, not caring about the men hearing him. Mia! He yelled at the top of his voice bouncing back to him in echoes. Neil frantically looked around, sweat dripping from his brow. His search seemed futile, and desperation clawed at him. He was about to turn around and look outside when he heard a voice. He stopped and listened. The voice was so faint he didn't hear it clearly at first, but when he calmed his heartbeat and the ringing in his ears, he finally heard the familiar voice calling his name from the other side of the building he hadn't checked. He began to hurry towards it and pushed the door open, only to see that there was another warehouse inside the first one. He had thought he and Mia had been kept in the one he just checked, but it turned out the building had another inner part. He called her name and heard her cry out his name. Neil sprinted towards her direction, and when he saw her, a relieved groan tore from his chest. But then he stopped short in his tracks when he saw the gallons and chains she was tied to. Then his eyes fell on a familiar device that was ticking around her midriff. Bomb! He looked at Mia's eyes and saw how swollen they were, and how they'd lost their glow. She was no longer crying but staring at him like she'd lost hope in living. Her expression was one of resignation and heartbreak, her eyes dull and lifeless. Neil felt his heart clench tightly as he noticed the bomb would go off in about 40 minutes. Without wasting time, he rushed towards her. When he knelt down beside her, Mia began to shake her head and tell him to go before the bomb exploded. "Neil, you have to leave me. The bomb will go off before you can get someone to defuse it," she said, her voice trembling with panic. "Please, go. Leave me." Neil cupped her face and said, "Why does it seem like you always want me to leave whenever I find you?" He stroked her cheek. "Remember, I used to defuse bombs when I was still in the military. Just like any bombs, I will defuse this one and take you out of here alive." A tear rolled down her cheek, and Neil leaned down and kissed it away. His lips lingered on her face for more than a second, his heart warming up. But knowing time was ticking away, he moved away from the kiss and stroked her cheeks, assuring her to stay calm while he cut the wire that would stop the bomb. Mia bobbed her head and told him, "I trust you." Neil smiled and sat down on his heels to examine the bomb. To keep her calm, he searched for a topic to talk about to keep her from panicking, and he found the right one when his eyes fell on her stomach. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes as he was trying to focus on the bomb, he asked, "Have you thought of names for our babies?" Mia shook her head while using her free hand to stroke the wound on his head as he bent down before her. "I haven't chosen a name yet, but I have been considering the ones we both thought of the night we laid in bed together." Mia knew they were talking to keep from panicking, but she couldn't help but notice her husband's momentary pause as he opened the bomb connection panel. She saw sweat glisten on his forehead, and he swallowed hard as he stared at the bomb connection panel like his worst nightmare had come to life. He didn't blink and stared at it in horror. Mia knew immediately something was wrong and asked, "What is it, Neil?" She remembered Mariana saying something about the bomb being a rare one, and from the look in Neil's eyes, she could tell it was indeed a rare one that seemed to make him speechless. Neil quickly flashed her a reassuring smile and said, "It's nothing." He lied to keep her calm so she wouldn't insist he leave her. He would rather die here with her than leave. The bomb was nothing like the ones he used to defuse in the past. It looked and seemed nothing like it. The wires were different. It was as if it had been made to never be diffused. He looked at the ticking time and saw that it was 38 minutes remaining. He felt his head begin to ring, and his heart began to beat wildly. There must be a way to stop the bomb, but looking at the complicated wires, he knew he could never risk cutting the wrong one, or else it would explode sooner than later. And if he didn't try, it would still explode in 37 minutes. "Mia," Neil said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I need you to stay calm. This bomb is different from the ones I've dealt with before, but I'm going to figure it out. Just keep talking to me, okay? Tell me more about the names you were considering." Mia nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, but her voice steady. "I was thinking about the names we talked about that night, but now that I've remembered my past, I think I know the right names for them." Neil momentarily stopped and looked up at her in disbelief. "You've remembered your past? Everything?" She nodded her head with a bittersweet smile. "Yes, I remember everything. I remember you. I remember us. I remember your parents and my mother. Neil, you look just like your father, so much like him." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she recalled how his father and mother had lain lifeless on the grounds of their house. "I am sorry, they got killed because of me. Mom wanted to take me away from Kelvin and asked for your father's help. If it weren't for me, she would never have gotten your family involved. I am sorry," she sobbed brokenly as she avoided his gaze. Neil swallowed the huge lump in his throat. He had once hated Ella and her daughter for dragging his family into their mess, but he would be no different from Kelvin if he still hated them for things that weren't their fault. If he had been in his father's shoes and Mia was in Ella's shoes, he would have done the same, perhaps even worse, to see that the woman he loved was out of danger. He had blamed Ella then because he had no idea what it was like to love someone wholeheartedly. He had no idea how love could change a man until he met Mia Harrison. He'd once told her that he'd get his revenge on the man who killed his parents by killing his entire family, but now he realized that was stupid of him to say. Mia was his life, she was his everything. If it was possible, he loved her more than love itself. Seeing her tears and broken state broke his heart into pieces. He reached out and cupped her face. "It was never your fault, Mia. I forgave Ella a long time ago, and I have never blamed you for anything. There's more I'd like to say, but for now, I will try to defuse this damned bomb while you tell me the names you picked, all right?" Mia nodded her head, smiling through her tears. She knew this was no time to get too emotional while the time was ticking away. Neil flashed her another smile and bent his head to continue what he was doing while asking her the names. "When I was little, I remember my mother always telling me a story about her father, my grandfather. She said he was a hero, and she wished she had a son to carry his name. Now that I think about it, I want one of our sons to have his name." "What's the name?" Neil asked as he tried to move the complicated wires apart. "Nolan. His name is Nolan, and our other son can be named after your father. Noah. What do you think?" Neil's hands moved with precision, but inside, his mind was racing. "I think those are beautiful names, my love. Our children will have the best names. Nolan and Noah, He traced the wires, trying to determine which one would stop the timer. His heart pounded in his chest, and sweat dripped from his forehead as he held the two wires, knowing he had to cut one to stop the timer. But he didn't know which one, as they were both the same color. If he cut the right one, the bomb would stop, but if he cut the wrong one, it would explode. Taking a deep breath, he made his decision to cut the one his instinct chose, but before he did, he looked up at his wife and cupped her cheek. "Mia, no matter what happens, I want you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. Whatever the outcome today, I will always be by your side, in death and in life." Mia's hand squeezed his gently. "I love you too, Neil. I believe in you." With those words, Neil used a sharp object he picked up from the floor and placed it against the wire. He didn't look down as he cut it. He was looking at his wife, who was gazing at him with so much love and trust, smiling at him. Smiling back at her, he cut the wire, and a booming sound erupted throughout the entire warehouse. Chapter 250 His Last Breath. With those words, Neil used a sharp object he picked up from the floor and placed it against the wire. He didn't look down as he cut it. He was looking at his wife, who was gazing at him with so much love and trust, smiling at him. Smiling back at her, he cut the wire, and a booming sound erupted throughout the entire warehouse. At first, Mia thought it was the bomb that exploded, and she kept her eyes shut with her hands gripping Neil's, her fingers digging into his skin. She didn't dare to move and didn't even open her eyes as she expected to feel the flames of the fire burning her flesh. But instead, she felt Neil's soothing touch on her cheeks, stroking her skin. "Open your eyes, Carita. I stopped the bomb," he said, his voice filled with relief and tenderness. Mia opened her eyes. She looked down at the bomb and saw that it had stopped ticking. Then she looked up at Neil in happy disbelief. "You did it. It stopped," she said, smiling and kissing his hand that was stroking her cheek. But he leaned down and covered her mouth with his before she could react. He kissed her like the world was ending and this was their last kiss, and she kissed him back with the same intensity. However, he pulled back before it could get deep and caressed her cheek, then her neck. Then he touched her belly and stroked it. "We did it," he whispered tenderly. Mia had already accepted her fate a moment ago, but knowing that the bomb had stopped and that they'd live to see their children made her so happy she was left shaky and weak. She'd heard so much about Neil's skills with defusing bombs, but she'd never seen him in action until now, and she couldn't be prouder of him than she was now. She laid her hand on her belly and smiled into his eyes. She wished she could hug him right now and kiss him longer with all the love and joy in her heart, but the gallons and chains were in the way. And as if knowing she wanted to be close to him, skin to skin, Neil stood up and began to frantically search for something to use to unlock the chains around her. He ran into the other door and came back holding a fire axe he'd probably picked from the fire axe cabinet. But his expression looked panicked and anxious. "I have to break you out of the chains immediately." The loud sound a moment ago came from outside. "It's a gunshot. No doubt Owen's men are back," Neil said as he hurriedly pulled the chain to break it with the axe. He had ignored the sound as he had been too worried about the bomb, but he'd spotted some cars outside when he went to get the axe. He raised the axe and with one strike, he broke the chains. He quickly removed them from around Mia and also removed the bomb suit from her body and tossed it aside. Then, not wasting time, he pulled her up and pulled her into his embrace. As usual, she melted into his embrace like liquid and hugged him back. He buried his head in the crook of her neck and closed his eyes to inhale the faint jasmine scent on her body and stroked her back lovingly. The hug only lasted a minute before he pulled away reluctantly. Despite the fact that he wanted to bask in her warmth and kiss her longer for all the days he'd went without her, he knew they had to leave before the men outside got in. "We have to go, my love. I'll carry you," he said as she began to walk forward, but Mia shook her head as she glanced at his bruised body and bloody bandage. "I'll walk myself, you." She broke off, and Neil saw her eyes widen. But before he could do anything or even turn to see what she was looking at behind him, Mia had used her strength to turn him over, and at that moment a gunshot went off. Mia's eyes widened at the same time the gunshot went off, and Neil swirled around only to see Owen holding the gun with a murderous expression. When Owen saw he had missed shooting Neil, he was about to pull the trigger again, but Neil was faster this time. He instinctively picked up the fire axe and hurled it toward Owen. Everything happened so quickly, and the axe struck Owen straight in the chest and stuck there before he could dodge. His eyes clouded in disbelief as the gun fell from his grip. He staggered as if trying his best to hold on, but his whole body weakened. He fell on his knees and blood began to ooze from his mouth and nose. Owen struggled to move or even speak, but all he could manage were curses before he felt the life slipping out of him. He choked on his blood, and the world began to blur away as he stared at the dirty ceiling, cursing Mariana and Neil for tricking him. He died before he could reflect on his life's mistakes and how he had failed to get what he wanted. However, before he took his last breath, he noticed something that made him smile in satisfaction. At last, he wouldn't be dying alone tonight. His lover would soon join him in the afterlife. At the same time Owen stopped breathing, Neil heard Mia cry out his name. The moment he turned, she began to fall, and he caught her body before she hit the ground. His arm, which was wrapped around her, came into contact with something sticky and warm. His expression turned to horror as he realized his wife had been shot. She had taken the bullet for him. No, 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 Mia, don't do this to me. Don't close your eyes, he cried, attempting to pick her up. But she grabbed his hand and shook her head with a wince as her back burned with any little movement. Neil, it hurts, please, she gasped, her voice weak and pained, tears filling her eyes and blurring her vision of him. Why the hell did you jump to meet the bullet? Neil asked, his voice slightly breaking. For a moment, he'd believed she'd pulled him out of harm's way and had missed the bullet as well, only to realize the bullet hadn't missed. No wonder that bastard Owen was smiling before his death. Why did you take the bullet? He muttered brokenly as he lifted her head onto his lap. Mia's back was burning so badly she wanted it to stop. Through her pain, she managed to raise her hand and cup his cheek. I love you, and I would take a bullet for you 100 times more, she whispered, her voice filled with determination and love for him. She swallowed convulsively to stop herself from crying and to keep him from panicking more than he already was. She wanted to survive, she wanted to live, but the pain was so intense she wished she could close her eyes and make it stop. Neil, I think I will die. It hurts so much, she whispered softly. Tears filled Neil's gray eyes as he looked into hers, but they didn't fall. Don't say that, you're not going to die. Not now, not ever. I won't let you, he said, his voice firm. I'm taking you to the hospital, and the doctors will nurse you back to health. They won't dare let you die. Without wasting any more time, he picked her up effortlessly and began to walk towards the exit in long strides. Mia, fighting to stay awake, called his name again, but he hushed her and told her to save her strength and not speak. Neil's heart and emotions were a complete mess. He didn't care if he had to kneel before anybody out there to help his wife. He was willing to do anything. He didn't want to lose her, not today, not ever. As he was approaching the exit, he realized the commotion and gunshots from earlier were the soldiers and Owen's men fighting outside. He had never been so relieved to see his men as he was at that moment. He spotted Liam the moment he stepped out, beating a man as if he'd kill him. But noticing the look in Neil's eyes, Liam pushed the man to another soldier and ran towards his friend, who looked like he was about to break down in tears. Liam, get the car! Hurry, we need to take her to the hospital. Neil yelled panickingly, not caring how they got to track his whereabouts for now. All he wanted was to get Mia out of danger before anything else. Noticing the blood trailing behind Neil, Liam wasted no time. He turned around, got the car, and stopped in front of Neil. Neil got inside with Mia on his lap. Mia, he called her name as he noticed she'd closed her eyes. Mia, he called again, shaking her. He began to beg her to wake up. Damn it, Mia, wake up! He looked towards Liam and yelled, why isn't she opening her eyes? Liam, tell her to open her eyes. He called her name again, his voice shaking, and the tears he had been fighting back for 20 years came streaming down his face like a dam breaking. He shook her, not stopping his tears, letting them flow freely, choking on his emotions as he begged her to open her eyes. Liam glanced back at him from the rearview mirror, shocked to see Neil crying. The sight of his friend breaking down was a gut-wrenching blow. He'd never seen Neil this broken or in tears before. He was the kind who hated being vulnerable to his emotions. Watching him like this made Liam's own throat burn, and he stepped on the gas and drove like the hounds of hell were after him. Mia, hold on, please, he silently prayed, knowing his friend would never overcome it if something were to happen to her, or if she were to die. Neil was shaking her so much that Mia groaned as her eyes slowly flew open. That hurts, she whispered weakly. Relief washed over Neil, and he hugged her tightly. Never do that to me again. Keep your eyes open, my love. Keep them open, he said, his voice a mix of relief and desperation. He yelled at Liam to hurry up and break the speed limit. Mia looked at her husband's tear-streaked face. She'd never seen him cry or look this broken. He looked so fragile and scared. He was now singing to her to keep her from closing her eyes. If you die, I will never forgive you. You better keep your eyes open, he told her again as she began to fall into the tempting sleep that was pulling her in. Mia managed a smile and said, I will never die and leave you. But if something were to happen to me, save our children. Neil shook his head and told her, nothing will happen to you. You will live and so will the babies. We will go on that vacation island we planned to go after you give birth. We'll have that dream wedding of yours. Nothing will ever happen to you. Nothing. At that moment, the car screeched to a stop in front of Silverbrook First Hospital. Liam rushed out and hurried to get the nurses to bring an emergency stretcher. As the nurses arrived and lifted Mia onto the stretcher, Neil held her hand tightly. You're going to be okay, Mia. I'm right here with you. Mia looked up at him, her vision already blurring. She held onto his hand tightly as she stared up at the hospital's white ceiling while they wheeled her into the emergency room. She heard the nurses yelling for Neil to stay out, but she didn't want to let go of him, and he didn't seem to want that either. They held on to each other tightly until Liam came forward and pulled Neil back. Mia felt the world begin to turn dark at the same time Neil's hand was forced away from hers. Before she could fall into the darkness, she whispered, I love you. I love you too, Mia. More than anything, he whispered as they wheeled her away from him, with Liam holding him back or he would have forced his way into the emergency operation room.